And so People's Economy Lab is a small but powerful team led by our lab leaders who collectively manage and implement the work of the organization. That includes myself, Faduma Fido, Derek Gruen, and Shiho Fiyuki. We also have two other amazing team members, Laura Nash, our communications and network organizer, and Mary Mitchell, our admin and operations coordinator. And so at Pell, we carry out our mission and work towards our vision through three interconnected programs. The first is collaborative governance. That's about creating decision-making systems where communities lead, not just advise, and where public resources are guided by community values, lived experience, and a broader definition of well-being. The next is community wealth building, which I'll focus on in our next slide. And the third is People's Economy Lab field building, which focuses on connecting leaders, sharing strategies, and aligning efforts across sectors so that isolated projects, organizations, and initiatives can coalesce into one cohesive movement. And so together, these programs help local BIPOC communities reclaim economic control, build democratic institutions, and foster resilience. Next slide. And so what is community wealth building? Well, this is the program to which this lunch lab relates and the program in which I work. Community wealth building is an economic development model that transforms local economies by giving communities direct ownership and control of their productive assets. That means community wealth building isn't just about creating jobs or attracting investment. It's about shifting who owns, who controls, and who benefits from the assets in a place, whether that's land, it's housing, it's small businesses, or it's the capital. It directly confronts the racial wealth gap, which is the result of centuries of theft, extraction, exploitation, and disinvestment from communities of color, and that resultant concentration of ownership. At the same time, community wealth building is a framework for building the economy we seek, that solidarity economy where wealth is democratized, workplaces are community-led, and equity is embedded in our institutions and the functions of our economy. And so, to advance towards those community wealth building goals, People's Economy Lab educates and builds awareness of community wealth building principles and practices. We enable and activate community-controlled initiatives and projects, and we catalyze change in local institutions to advance BIPOC community wealth building, looking to embed equity and redistribute power in their practices and systems. And so when we think of some of the local institutions we work with, they include the City of Seattle, Seattle Public Utilities, King County Communities of Opportunity, and the United Way. In our work with the City of Seattle over the last 2 years, or over a 2-year period, we developed our community wealth building report that we submitted to the City Council and a public-facing community wealth building report. That identifies 6 community wealth building strategies for Washington State and Seattle as a city to close the racial wealth gap and build BIPOC generational and community wealth. Those strategies are broad-based worker ownership, affordable and community-controlled capital, community ownership of real estate, progressive procurement strategies, equitable small business ecosystems, and wealth retention and asset protection programs. One of the people helping to lead this work is today's guest speaker, lead consultant with Weaving Abundance, Jackie Mena, who's also serving as a community wealth building fellow with the People's Economy Lab. Jackie has deep experience as a community-centered strategist and systems thinker. She led the Generational Wealth Initiative at the city's Department of Neighborhoods, where she worked with People's Economy Lab, Headwater People, and BIPOC community members to surface powerful strategies to close the racial wealth gap. Today, she's helping bring those ideas to life through place-based implementation in South Park and Brighton. BIPOC communities facing enormous pressure from displacement, but also building new forms of ownership and self-determination. Jackie's going to walk us through what this work looks like on the ground and what we can learn from the communities who are leading the way and what we can also contribute and how we can amplify this work. After Jackie speaks, we'll have time for questions and answers, then move into breakout groups for a chance to reflect and connect. We're so glad you're here with us. And with that, I'll hand it off to my amazing friend and colleague, Jackie Mena.
Thank you, Jacuna, and welcome everyone. I am very excited to be here, and I'm very honored to be the first Community Wealth Building Fellow with People's Economy Lab. I feel like we're forging new paths left and right, and just having Pulse support as this project continues to grow, and the support of a lot of people in this room. I think of myself as an organizer and a strategist, and this work is about movement building and systems change. And that doesn't happen alone. That happens within a larger ecosystem of other organizers and other champions and other folks who are moving this work. And so, really excited to see a lot of you in this room. Hopefully, by sharing my work today, it also inspires folks who are learning about it for the first time to also participate and to see how we can work together. So, really excited to be here. And because I have so many partners in the room and folks who are in this with me, there's going to be some special shout outs throughout this presentation. So don't be shy if you want to supplement anything that I'm saying in the chat. I really do feel like I'm speaking to our collective work, and so feel free to jump in and contribute. But yeah, to get this started, um, wow, People's Economy Lab and I think, started working the closest together. Were introduced a few years ago with the Generational Wealth Initiative. The Generational Wealth Initiative came out of the pandemic, and it was a city response to the demonstrations for Black Lives. In addition to receiving some funding to explore some new programming around addressing the racial wealth gap and working with BIPOC communities to create pathways for generational wealth building, we were also directed by the Seattle City Council to think about the broader role of the city of Seattle in addressing the racial wealth gap and how the city could build a permanent ladder out of poverty for residents. And so many of the folks who participated in this initiative are in this room today, and I just want to shout that out because this really was our collective work. And though I worked for the city for almost 7 years and worked on strategic initiatives, and my values have always been centered in how our communities forging their own solutions. This initiative was really a transformational opportunity for me to focus on our economy and to partner with communities and community-based organizations in new ways. And so it really is the origin story to the work that I've been working on over the last year. Next slide. So, as part of the Generational Wealth Initiative, we spent nearly 2 years working with neighborhood stakeholders in a participatory research process. Here you can see sort of some of our early scheming as a roundtable and thinking through where does the racial wealth gap manifest in our local communities? What are the impacts and what could potential solutions be? You also see an image of folks who worked with Via Comunitaria. Via Comunitaria led one of our pilots that focused on one of our strategies. I'll talk about that in a second. But that was also part of our participatory research. It was actually identifying potential strategies and then practicing them, piloting them, seeing what challenges emerged as folks tried to advance these strategies through their working community. So that effort culminated in a report. Next slide. Which People's Economy Lab wrote up, strategies to close the racial wealth gap in Seattle. It included big recommendations for the city as a municipality to think about what is the role of an institution in addressing the racial wealth gap. And it also codified 6 strategies that were identified by our community partners, 6 community wealth building strategies to help us really create a thriving community where people are rooted and have what they need. And so we welcome you to check out this report if you haven't already, and I'll be calling out special sections in it. Next slide. So these were the 6 strategies that were identified by our community partners: broad-based worker ownership, community ownership of real estate, equitable small business ecosystems, affordable and community-controlled capital, progressive procurement, and wealth retention and asset building programs. People's Economy Lab really did research. Just different community initiatives across the country, across the world. I think we even learned about some in Spain to give us a better understanding of what these strategies look like in practice and how they can help create a stronger ecosystem and local economy for communities of color. Um, And that's ultimately how we landed on these six strategies. Uh, and hopefully People's Economy Lab at a later date can sort of break down what each of these means. But I just kind of wanted to name these are the six strategies that our work is focusing on. And in addition to identifying this community wealth building framework for the city of Seattle, there were also really important learnings that we took away from the participatory research. So this is present in the report, but really thinking about not just what is the framework that can help us build a healthier economy for our local residents and beyond, but also what's it going to take to actually make those shifts? How do we support systems in changing? And working better for folks. And what we learned from our pilots and from our participatory research was that there were really big challenges that communities encountered, even with resources, right? To really scale this work, there was a need for flexible, trust-based funding. This was somewhat city-facing, but really the desire for community self-determination. So rather than an institution or a funder defining what shifts needed to happen, really allowing communities to self-determine their futures and the strategies that would work best for them and how to implement them. And then lastly, collective organizing structures that help facilitate collaboration and not competition among communities. Oftentimes, having been in the funder role, I saw how funding played an important part in creating competition among organizations. And as much as we say we want to see coalitions and we want to see organizations working together, our funding models don't always encourage that. And so, how can we interrupt that pattern and really create spaces for that collective organizing to happen? Next slide. And so, Analia, you're in the room, and this is a quote well, Analia actually sent an email to us while we were working on this project, and it felt incredibly it, concise in naming the problem that a lot of community organizations face. And so this is a dense slide, but I am going to take the time to read it fully. Analia shared that from our experiences, we know it is critical that the city of Seattle start investing in long-term sustainable funding for BIPOC-led organizations and community projects. This funding must include flexible dollars that will help us build our capacity to do community wealth building work. Too many BIPOC-led organizations are understaffed, underpaid, under-resourced, and thus forced to focus on survival rather than innovation and transformation. We are forced to jump from one RFP process to another, constantly submitting applications to prove our value and worth to city departments. This is not the most efficient use of our time. We want funding processes rooted in trust that truly recognize our BIPOC organizations as essential partners to the city of Seattle as we work to reach our shared goals and shared goals for our communities. Next slide. And so, all that to say, truly being part of the Generational Wealth Initiative, being in close relationship with the community partners that were a part of that process and beyond, inspired me to really think about where I wanted to put my capacity and how I could contribute. You'll see in the report that one of the open questions that we left after 2 years of that process was, how does this work continue? How do you support an ecosystem? Is it a program at the city? Is it a department at the city? Is it an agency outside of the city? Is it, a network? Like, what is the right mechanism for continuing this work and addressing those challenges that were daylighted through our research? And so last July, I left the city of Seattle with the goal of keeping this work going and continuing to grapple with those questions and to see how can we apply those learnings and these strategies in communities and how I could work with them to help truly shift systems. And so I'm calling that effort the building of local resilient communities. Next slide. And so, coming out of that research, I developed this theory of change. When neighborhood networks share a vision for development that is rooted in community wealth building, when we strengthen local capacity to implement that vision, and when we build shared funding mechanisms to deploy flexible capital in support of that vision, we establish a nurturing environment for economic transformation and a sustainable ecosystem for growing shared wealth that will support generations to come. Now, that is a pretty meaty theory of change. And so, put simply, you really need three things in order to give enough structure for systems change to happen. One, a strong vision that communities develop, their self-determined vision for what growth can look like in their neighborhoods and what development should look like and what the future they want to foster. You need a strong network of community-based organizations or change makers that can help implement that vision and that are colluding, not competing, working together, collaborating to really implement that vision over years, perhaps even decades. And lastly, you need capital. You need a base of resources and assets that you can actually leverage to unlock other dollars. This is an important one because oftentimes um, capital is not something a lot of organizations have on their books, and flexible capital, community controlled capital. And so what we learned in our participatory research that having a strong base of funding that communities get to self-determine how to apply to support their vision offers the flexibility to be innovative and to really move in ways that sometimes larger systems or outside stakeholders can't see to the same degree that folks who are living in these neighborhoods can. Next slide. And so when I left the city, I was like, we need to see this done, and you know, even though this research was innovative and told its own story, a lot of the learnings you see appear in report after report after report, in advisory board after advisory board, in so many places, right? These are common themes that over my 7 years at the city, I saw constantly being raised by community organizations. And so while we've made huge advances in creating new types of funding programs, and I say we as in our region, right? This work doesn't just live in one place. It's not just funded by one entity. But we've done a lot to create programs, to create funding mechanisms, to create coalitions that are moving this work. And unfortunately, after we published this report, we are hoping the city of Seattle would take a big stake in saying, hey, we need to really double down and make a big bet on community wealth building as the way to build resilience in our local communities. That big bet was not made, but my theory is that once we start seeing these strategies working, and if we're able to concentrate them in places and you see these shifts happening in real time, hopefully that creates the change that we want to see in a bigger scale, right? Hopefully we're able to build that buy-in, that undeniability that this works. And so I've been working to apply these strategies in a place-based way. I'm working in two communities, which I'll share in a second. But the theory here is if we can apply this in places where communities are facing a high risk of displacement, in communities where major civic investments are going to be implemented, and therefore there are great opportunities, right, to leverage those investments and harness the prosperity that they create to support addressing the racial wealth gap and recirculating resources within the neighborhood, building resilience. There's also risks, right? So if we don't do something in places where major civic investments are happening, we also know, right, based on history, what that'll mean. It'll mean displacement will continue, maybe even be stressed even further, and we won't get the results that we want to see in our communities. And then lastly, working in places where communities are already invested in and committed to working together to change systems. So this is something that I found. I'm curious when we do breakout rooms what folks think, but for me, to really do systems change, you have to be working together, and folks need to want to do that. And so the places where I'm working already have communities that are coming together, self-organizing to support community wealth building and systems change in their neighborhoods. And so those two places, dun, 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 are South Park and Brighton. And stakeholders, allies in this work in both of these neighborhoods are in this meeting. So again, I welcome you to share any thoughts as I describe some of the work that we're doing in these neighborhoods. So one of the beautiful things, remember, this theory of change hinges on three things, right? Strong neighborhood networks, capital, and a strong vision. And so in both of these neighborhoods, we had a natural concentration of partners that were also part of the Generational Wealth Initiative. So on the left here, you see partners in South Park. The ones that are bolded were directly funded or participated in the research as part of our roundtable members and beyond. And our other organizations that maybe partner with Pell or other agencies that are advancing community wealth building in the neighborhood. So this is really our base in South Park for starting to work together and coalesce around what would a vision that is rooted in community wealth building look like? Who are the partners, the champion organizations who are at the ready to really help advance these strategies and implement this vision and work together to build power to do this long term. And then on the right in Brighton, we've got similarly Brighton Communities and Resource Equity, two organizations that were active participants in the Generational Wealth Initiative, and a few others, TOA, Alpha Sharp, South End Connect, who are already naturally coalescing, are part of what we're calling the network in Brighton, meeting every Tuesday and having conversations around what are the levers that we want to move, what is the type of power we want to build, what are the strategies that'll help us get there to truly transform a local economy to work better for residents. Next slide. And so the vision, there's a lot of work happening in South Park right now in reimagining how the neighborhood can work better for folks. Here I have an image that's pulled from the Reconnect South Park page. This is our website. Reconnect South Park is a coalition of folks. I believe Maria Ramirez is in the room. She's leading this group, and perhaps several other folks are in the room who are part of Reconnect South Park. But for those of you who are less familiar with the neighborhood of South Park, back in there's been a lot of, uh, I don't even, I don't want to understate the amount of how policies have impacted livability in this region. Everything from the rechanneling of the Duwamish River to the development of a highway that bisects this neighborhood and separates assets and communities from being connected. These are big civic projects that were superimposed on this community and have impacted it. And there are movements right now to clean the river, to reconnect South Park by potentially removing the highway and studying, how the neighborhood can be reconnected, as the name says. And these are big opportunities. You also have departments purchasing land along the river because what was once a Superfund is now in the late stages of its cleanup process. And so pretty soon this river is going to be an even more active asset that communities can use for economic prosperity, recreation, connections to nature, and habitat restoration. And so, all that to say, right, this is part of the larger vision that communities are considering as these civic investments are coming. What does it mean if a highway that currently I think takes up over 60 acres of land in this neighborhood, what if that land were rematriated for community benefit? What would that benefit be? Who are the partners who can help imagine what goes there, right? What gets built in its stead? And so that's a really exciting part of the vision that's developing in South Park. Again, looking at the river, how do we reintegrate it as an asset into this neighborhood? How do we create access points? What do we do with river adjacent land? How do we create a stewardship plan and think about just both Georgetown and South Park are the only two neighborhoods with a river running through it. What does that mean? What does that mean for this community? What are the opportunities there? There are ideas around community-centered housing. So thinking about different housing models that can support multi-generational living, that can create home ownership opportunities for the young folks and the future like generations that will steward this land and be part of this neighborhood. Um, there's also a lot of interest in exploring markets and business ownership in this neighborhood, right? I think Jose from Growing Contigo's here. I'm not sure if anyone from Cultivate South Park is here. Via Comunitaria has advocated for tianguis, marketplaces for vendors to come to create food access and has been instrumental in creating different cooperative ownership models that bring fresh food into the neighborhood. And so there's a lot of ideas about what are the levers that need to be moved in order to transform this economy to work better for residents. And this is part of the vision that is shaping in South Park in yeah, that transformation process. In Brighton, similarly, the network is at work, really visioning what transformation could look like. Here, there's an image of the Arches, which is a multifamily building on Holly and Rainier. I think just a couple years ago, communities came together to fundraise to purchase this building. And likewise, one of the big strategies that we're exploring is how do we transform multifamily housing across the Rainier corridor throughout this neighborhood to really support community ownership? And that can look like anything from conversions from rental to condos or cooperative ownership. That could look like more nonprofit ownership of these buildings and long-term stewardship and democratic decision making and empowerment, different other forms of ownership. And so that's one big transformative strategy that we're exploring in Brighton. Also considering building generational wealth and the avenues for returning back to the neighborhood. So we have partners like Resource Equity that has a track record of working with homeowners who might be interested in expanding the number of units that their properties can house, right? You might have a small house, but a big lot. What would it look like to redevelop, secure your own retirement in that redevelopment, but also create affordable housing that perhaps family members or neighbors who are displaced can move into as owners or renters. And so creating different avenues for returning back to the neighborhood, but also building that generational wealth and working specifically with families on envisioning that process. And then lastly, as housing is a really big focus in Brighton, and as we think about the different housing and transportation, because I didn't mention this, but the big civic investment coming to Brighton is an infill station on Graham Street. So we in the South End and beyond know the impacts that the light rail had along the Martin Luther King corridor and the Rainier Valley in terms of housing prices, but also connectivity, right? So it is great that there will likely be an infill station added on Graham Street, but we also need to be ready to take part in those opportunities and really shore up communities to be able to participate in the abundance that is created through that additional light rail station. And so in Brighton, we're thinking about how do we expand connectivity with working closely with the Department of Transportation on envisioning, different ways to connect folks to that station and other assets throughout the neighborhood. And so this is where we're talking about developing industries, right? As we're hoping to own multifamily housing, what does property management look like? Is that a field? Is that a new industry in the neighborhood where young folks can participate, where we can be job creators, where we can transform industries into broad-based worker-owned enterprises? Similarly, on the transportation front, right? When we're talking about multimodal transportation, perhaps a fleet of small vehicles, right, to help transport people to light rail stations. Could that be an industry that is place-based, that is a small business that's again worker owned and provides jobs for young folks and becomes an employment source in the neighborhood and an ownership source. So this part of the vision that's building in Brighton actively and yeah, really exciting. Next slide. And so I've now covered, right? We've got the network, the capacity building that we're doing, the organizing that we're doing in order to strengthen our neighborhood networks. We've got the vision that folks are developing together and really thinking about what are our assets, what's unique in our geography, what's unique in our skill set and in our interests to develop that vision. And then there's the third thing that this theory of change sort of postulates, right? And that's capital. We need capital to help really grease the wheels of this trifecta of systems and to help with the implementation of that vision and the capacity building for our champions and our place-based networks. And so, in exploring as part of this process, I've set the goal of fundraising $10 million for each of these neighborhoods. And this is a fund that will, like I said, help support the implementation of this vision, help support our neighborhood champions in advancing that vision. It's interesting because I'm sure there's many folks here. I think of Adon, who I saw join, who have worked on really big multi-purpose building development, housing development, and truly in our local economy, 10 million can barely buy you a building, if that. So sometimes I look at this number and I'm like, ooh, we're going to need a lot more than just 10 million to do anything substantial. That said, not to sort of, hopefully you can amplify this in your own storytelling through the chat. But recently, when I toured the hub, which White Center CDA was a big champion in creating a whole new building for community services and a whole new housing project, which they're calling the hub. On that tour, I think I remember it was an over $40 million project just for the hub, not even the housing component. And so I'm like calculating, I'm like, ooh, 40 million just for this building, right? What will 10 million get, right? And I remember Adon saying White Center CDA partnered with other folks to raise capital together through the I think it was called Rise Together campaign. And of that campaign, I think White Center CDA got 4 or 5 million, maybe 6 million, right? And I just remember Adon saying, that was transformational, right? Just having access. Like in my mind, I'm thinking about this mega budget and I'm like, ooh, 10 million, chump change. But it really can help unlock so much. And so that's really the theory here, right? 10 million can feel like a lot, when it's being leveraged. I think of another partner, Curtis Brown, who works for Brighton Communities, is one of the masterminds behind the Brighton Network. And I think of, when I told him the goal of 10 million, he was like, that's great, because just having 10 million in the bank opens up even more access to capital in the form of loans or just being able to demonstrate that you have a security and for folks to invest in your project, right? First money in helps you move fast. And so I just, again, set the goal of 10 million and I'm committed to it and fundraising it for these two neighborhoods to really have that grease to make this work happen. I'm very proud, and this is part of the work that we've been doing. We've started to put together a community wealth building fund advisory group. Many of you are in this room right now. The New Funders Collaboratives in particular has signed up to be godparents to this particular strategy, which again, I'm very grateful for. And the idea here is, having folks who know how to build funds, know what the different options are. I think there's a lot of creativity that our neighborhoods can use in determining how you build long-term infrastructure for this fund to be held. So rather than thinking of this fund as a one-time investment in one project, thinking of it as seed capital, right? That can be leveraged and grown and can be invested in regenerative ways. And so what is the mechanism for deploying capital in that way? Is it a CDFI that's place-based? Is it a community foundation? Is it something else? There's a lot of different ways that this fund can be deployed and can be held and can be grown. And so our fund advisors are going to be helping us explore what are those different tools, working directly with neighborhoods to think about what is the best mechanism for the neighborhood, its conditions, its goals, its long-term vision, and helping implement that, along with helping to fundraise the 10 million. And then lastly, as we're going through this process, I think something really exciting is that in the exploration of what community controlled capital could look like, especially in a place-based way, we're going to be building a lot of shared knowledge and tools, right? Just even in the exploration of, is it a CDFI? Is it a community foundation? There's a lot of discernment that we can use, right? And building an understanding of what's working, what's not working, what works in best in what situations, and just thinking about just how we build that knowledge and share it with other neighborhoods and other places is really exciting, because yeah, really exciting. So, where are we now? What's happening? Right now, we are actively planning and organizing. So, like I said, I'm working with networks in both of these neighborhoods to self-organize and figure out how do we create this vision? How do we move dollars? What are our projects? There's the fund development, so working with our fund advisors to really bring together resources to better understand what type of fund will work best in these neighborhoods, or what are our funding options and how do we work with our network to define that and fundraise for it. And then lastly, project implementation. Ideally, this would be like a one, it would be so nice if this could just be a linear process. But the truth is, a lot of these strategies need to be overlapped and working together. So we have projects in all of these neighborhoods that are also being developed and implemented. And this is all of the pieces that are currently spinning in our place-based approach to hyperlocal resilient economies. Next slide. So how you can help. This is the end, and I'm really excited to have breakout groups so we can all talk. But ways that you can help. One, you can support our neighborhood networks. If you're part of these communities and you want to join, fabulous. These networks are growing, and it's going to take a lot of momentum, right, to really move the needle on this. And so consider joining the neighborhood network, sharing resources with neighborhood networks. So if you're someone who is working to advance community wealth building or other strategies, and you're like, hey, I think I have something I can offer neighborhood networks, please let us know so we can make those connections. And then funding this organizing effort, my time, Pell's time, the organization's time and resources, right? Organizing and coming together, it takes resources. And so if you can support that, fabulous. Second way, if you want to join our fund advisory group, or contribute to this flexible capital, community controlled capital, that's also on the table. And then lastly, I'm calling sort of each of these neighborhoods by the end of our visioning process, we'll have identified between 3 and 6 hero projects. So these are really big bets, right? So if you think back to the Brighton vision, let's say the hero project that develops is we want to purchase these 8 multifamily housing buildings and convert them into condos. That's a really big lift. That's huge, right? That's a multi-year strategy that's going to take tens of millions of dollars to do. It's going to take not just the purchasing of the building, but the tenant organizing, the policy change, the infrastructure development. These are really big bets. And so, as we're developing these hero projects, perhaps you'd be interested in helping advance one of these projects. So, please join a project team, or consider investing in the implementation of a project. So, I know through my conversations with folks, maybe you're in a role where you manage a fund that is doing impact investing. Just sort of giving to a different fund might not be the right avenue for you, but investing in a real estate strategy might be the perfect place. Offering a low interest loan might be the perfect way that you can plug in. And so just consider each of these projects will also have their own story, their own narrative, their own mechanism for supporting them, and consider doing that as well. So I'm saying these are 3 asks, but really it's a lot of asks baked in there. And yeah, just excited to be here at the end.
Thank you, Jackie. That was great. So exciting to see the theory turning into practice. We're not doing the breakout rooms quite yet. We're actually going to do Q&A, which Juguna is going to be facilitating. So anyone who has questions, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you again, Jackie. That was really powerful. Any questions? And please don't be shy. Don't be shy. Maybe I'll start with a question to get us started, Jackie. Jackie, can you talk a little bit about the people in your in our neighborhood networks? Who are some of the folks? Where do they come from? What do they do? And how are they connecting with others in the network?
Of course. Honestly, they are in the room right now. So I shared, I guess, oh, well, Curtis. So I want to call in Curtis because Curtis really is the man behind bringing together the network in Brighton. How did I start working in these neighborhoods? I live in South Park. I worked closely with communities in South Park. And so when I left the city, it was just a natural place to keep organizing. How I started in Brighton is Mr. Curtis. So I'll turn it over to you to talk about the network.
You're muted, Curtis.
I think it's only fair that I get put on the spot because I do it to Jackie all the time. Our concept of the network was that if you want to completely buy our slogan is buy, build, and own a neighborhood. And if you're going to have such an audacious goal of literally buying a whole neighborhood, you have to create a network to do that. One organization can't do it. So as Jackie mentioned, a lot of the amazing folks from Jaguna to Jackie to Caleb to Kiana. I mean, we literally have every division in the city of Seattle working on this project. We have all the utilities, Seattle SPU, City Light. We have literally brought we have 125 organizations that are currently specifically working on a specific task. We currently, like she said, we have 20 real estate projects under plan. We have 25 non-real estate projects under plan, and we have small groups working on each one. As Andra, who is part of our group, said, well, how do we prioritize? And I said, we don't prioritize. Actually, we have people working on every single one of these projects. So it is the most amazing group that I've ever worked with. They are passionate. Everybody brings stuff to the table every Tuesday in our crazy chaotic meetings, and we debate issues and we talk about issues. And it's the team. It's all those organizations literally working, under this one umbrella of the network, which is interesting because the network is separate from the project. I just want to make that point, is the network lives outside of our project. So the network we developed here can also work in South Park. It can work in White Center. It can work around around the city. So it's just an amazing group of people.
And then I would say in South Park, Analia, I'm not sure if you want to share anything. Analia has just over the years been an incredible coalition builder. And I think the organizing work happening in South Park has really just been an overlap of different coalitions that have come together to tackle childcare, to tackle housing, to tackle community space. Displacement pressures are really creating organizational pressures across the neighborhood. And that's been something that has unified a lot of organizations there, and just thinking about what real estate plays can be made and what can community stewardship of land look like in South Park. But Analia, do you want to share?
I don't know what to share really. I think it seems we are all in the same boat, learning together and moving together to claim the power to own the land, some part of the land for the community that contribute here. And again, as you, Chris, we have a great group also. And sometimes we don't know what we are doing, but we are advancing. Every day we learn something and we reach more goals. And thank you, Jackie, for creating this space.
And Amber, I see you have your hand.
Yeah, thanks. Um, I'm like I'm so excited about all the networking that's happening on what I call like the uses side, if you're thinking like of a fund. And that like concept of not having competition, but building resiliency in the network so that investments can come in and like actually support each other and de-risk projects and areas. I'm really interested in the mechanisms and tools that you've been thinking about around how to support investors that want to specifically invest in regions and not just around like I'll say dominant financial culture thinking of taking the excess of the wealth that you have and distributing that. Like a foundation is a really good example. They'll have the majority of their portfolio in general public markets and then give away, you know, some 5% of it or something. And even if they're generously trying to take down a fund, it's like up to 15. And I'm really interested in figuring out how to provide the opportunity for investors to take their entire portfolio and put it into things that they believe in and structuring like the real estate component and like the different parts of the way that they're thinking about their investment and finding places that they can have a de-risked way to do that. And I feel like there are ways that public markets already do this. And if we could just find the way to transfer that into like our social investing paradigms, there's a lot of capital that is interested in making those moves.
This is a great question. And to be honest, and what I love about this work is, like I said in my introduction, I am a community organizer, I am a strategist. I am not the expert, right, in everything. And that is why I believe in the power of a network, right? It's about bringing people together to really solve those problems collaboratively. And so I'm like very quickly scanning the room and I'm like, where's my new funders collaborative? Because if I'm honest, I'm really excited to partner with them. I know that that is everything that you just laid out is a question that they've been grappling with and talking about and trying to figure out what is their role in creating those shifts, right? Especially for folks with access to wealth. And so I don't know, any volunteers, Sherry?
Um, I think, yeah, that one thing I try to tell people, sorry, I'm not on video right now, but one thing I try to encourage people to think about is that even our idea of risk is skewed. So I would argue that your investment in a local community where you have people bought into this is what we want, this is what we need, this is what we will support. That is about as strong of an investment that you could find. And so if there is a lot of deprogramming, I think, that we need to do, and that's something that we would like to help to facilitate through other conversations like this and bringing in more funders who are beginning to walk that journey.
I'll also say, as I've been having conversations and sort of building out that fund advisory group, I've learned a lot about how wealth is held, right? And frankly, it's a lot of information that in my 35 years of life I never encountered because that those are the silos that we see when it comes to wealth and money, how it's held, how it's deployed. And so I think just breaking that silo and really creating a space for folks who have engaged with that system can share sort of how it works and then work to challenge it and change it together is going to be really powerful. Dion's not in this space right now, Dion from Dencham, but I feel like we've had great conversations just about like, okay, this is how money is held. Like, what does it look like to shift that? And I think this is an opportunity for that in a couple ways. So there's the $10 million, which frankly is I imagine that being fundraised in a way that's like you're just going to put your money in the hands of community and trust, right? I think in my mind, the risk is, this funding is used one time to support incredible community projects that are led by BIPOC communities. Like that's the risk, right? Give money and that will be the result, like bare minimum result. What could happen beyond that is our wildest dreams, right? This funding can actually become a resource that can be regenerative, that can be expanded, that can grow security for communities in ways that we haven't seen previously. And so I think that's part of the experimentation. I've also worked with impact investors. And so if that's not your jam, if that's not the mechanism, just giving, perhaps you can be an investor in one of these projects. We know are lucrative, right? Like there's a reason why there's a public real estate industry. There is money to be made. And so perhaps there are impact investors who see that more sort of as like the scale of that they can invest in or the right mechanism for that. But I believe both are necessary. I don't know, Amber, did that get to your question?
Yeah, no, I think like an ongoing, like emergent conversation. I would love to connect with people who are thinking about some of like just like the gears and like oils to make it happen. I think for the project that I'm currently participating in, it has scale, and I've been so fortunate to have mentors to also help me because my lived experience was not immersed in like financial understanding. And by really being part of like the community that's created the vision and the systems together, that's then kind of taken me to the place of being curious and starting to develop some of the actual tools. And I'm finding that it's actually not that complicated. Like it's unfamiliar, but the tools are being used. It's just a matter of taking them and kind of repackaging them and using maybe like doing code switching and using the words of the dominant financial culture to explain what risk can be in this situation or what a credit enhancement can be in this situation or what a revolving fund can be in this situation and like packaging that so that it goes into the system like all of the uses that we have a pretty clear understanding of. um, I I think there's just, I mean, there's billions of dollars. Like there's so much money that's actually like really values aligned with the work that we want to do. And so I'm really interested in thinking big enough. Like let's start with a $500 million Duwamish Valley Fund and like let's create a mechanism that impact investors can participate in that and feel de-risked. Um, yeah, I'm really excited about doing the work.
For sure. I know this conversation, right? We're just going back and forth. But one of the things that I forgot to mention is in strengthening our network, right? It's also creating shared knowledges and learning about these systems together and really thinking about how do we break it down and what is the right path for each community because it might be different. And so I'm grateful because People's Economy Lab is helping shape those conversations. You know, we didn't dive very deep into what the community wealth building strategies look like in practice, but that kind of curriculum is what Pell is offering our networks and creating these learning labs to really help us all understand what could this look like in practice. And so breaking down community controlled capital, what could that look like and what do we want to build?
And we do have a question in the chat from Aaron Garcia. And so that question is, given all y'all built in South Park and Brighton, I'm wondering, how do we protect or prop up this kind of deep place-based work when systems, particularly government, philanthropic partners, lenders, etc., have a pattern of showing up strong, then pulling back just as momentum builds. Examples, pandemic, budget cuts, and new electeds. So maybe I'll tackle that first one, and then he has a second question.
Ooh, Adam, that is exactly why we're here today. I didn't want to get too down, but this was a big initiative. It was funded by a couple $1 million to explore this question. We had support from electeds to explore this work. City Council was very invested. And then we saw big shifts in City Council. I'm looking at Jaguna, I'm looking at Cindy, I'm looking at all of our roundtable members, right, who were on that journey with me, where we were building something. Mind you, it was a really tall order with very little time and at the end of the day, limited funding. But we were excited, right? That report had a place where it could go to transform systems long term. And then it wasn't adopted. And then it kind of died. And then it was kind of put on a shelf. And so I think that exact pattern is what inspired me to leave the city and do this work as an organizer and strategist, working with the communities that I love and am part of. And so that's one, right? And I would say the theory of me leaving is, and the theory of doing this work, and I know that my partners in both of these neighborhoods agree with this, or, when we are our best selves, agree with this, which is after almost 7 years of working in the city, I know there are cool people who work in the city and want to fund good work. I know that there is a desire to participate and to see this happen. I know that city research and government research, I see partners like Julia in the room, right? Like I know that this is something folks want to do, but sometimes you need that power to that coalition building to lead, right? You need that capacity to show up first for government to be able to follow. I think oftentimes we've been caught in this place where we're waiting. And I mean, just to read back on Alia's quote, right? Where so much of funding for nonprofits and community-based organizations is dictated by the RFP, how it's designed, what it says. And so when that's sort of the dynamic where we're chasing funds and that's defining how we do our work, that's going to be constant. And so when leadership shifts happen, we're just going to keep doing that, right? Like we're just going to keep going with the next vision that the next leader is developing. This is fundamentally about shifting power so that communities are the ones defining the agenda. So that Curtis gave a long list of city departments that are partnering with the Brighton community. Many of those are like, we love your vision. How can we participate, right? And even the transit-oriented development that's going to be happening along Graham Street, we're in active conversations around, hey, how can our community-based research, our hero strategies, our vision be what gets codified in your recommendations for the transit-oriented development that the city is going to support? And so it's about shifting power and truly having this be grassroots work and led by the grassroots. And in order for that to be successful, communities need to be working together, because this is another thing I saw in my many years in government. It's very easy for communities to splinter and to each be having independent conversations, sort of moving their siloed agenda, which is still good, right? Everyone's trying to do good work, but when you're doing it in silo, it's about moving your independent project or your independent agenda as an organization, and not about thinking about the larger system that we're trying to impact and change. And so that's why we're here colluding for collective action, right? We're here talking, getting aligned behind a shared vision, and then our advocacy becomes about moving that. And, I say that to you, Adam, knowing that's exactly what you've done as part of White Center CDA. So I know this isn't sort of, me writing a new book. It's just me emphasizing the places communities have been successful is when they come together and they advocate together and they set the agenda together. And so that is what we're trying to do in both of these neighborhoods. And I believe philanthropy and government will follow and will fund.
Jackie, and I think you answered the second part of the question, which is, what have you been learning about safeguarding the ecosystem, especially when institutions step away? Is there anything else you think you want to touch on in that regard?
Well, I guess one thing that's been on my mind, I had a friend who was part of the Generational Wealth Initiative, Erica Ward, send me an article after Bill Gates announced his spend down plan for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I guess this journalist went and talked to different regions, right? Because they do global philanthropy. So kind of like how will this impact your work as, a region in Latin America or in Southeast Asia or wherever, right? And what in this article, what I read was this is like we need to be investing in hyper local economies to be resilient, right? To be able to take in these funds, build infrastructure, redefine local power if these institutions aren't going to be the ones sort of doing that, right? Which I don't think they should have ever been the ones doing that, but there's just a big call to action, I think, right now in this moment, given everything that's happening federally, to start focusing on hyperlocal solutions and building our local capacity. And so when I think about the folks in this room right now, I know that there are folks who are in neighborhoods doing the work, building their own capacity and their own neighborhood networks. I also know that there are folks who want to support this work. And so really thinking about how, as you're investing in projects, how are you investing in local capacity, infrastructure building, and moving resources so that they're controlled by communities and not defined by institutions that we know get messed with when different types of leaders get elected. And so, yeah, just again, I think there's a movement right now. We got to go hyper local. That's the conclusion.
Thank you.
Okay, and then I'm a chatter, so I'm also thinking back to one of, why did we land on community wealth building and what is one of the core tenets of community wealth building? It's communities having, okay, Jiguna, you might have to help me here, but having control over their own productive assets, right? And so that is like, how do we start to move that in a local way? How do we shift who controls the assets, whether that's capital, cash, whether that's buildings, whether that's infrastructure? How are we creating hyperlocal tools so that, so to build on that too, and this is something I wasn't able to go into in my presentation, but sort of overlaid with this, and I think, where are you? Where are you? Christoph is part of a narrative fellowship with me. Laura's part of a narrative fellowship with me. And sort of an overlay into this is a narrative strategy. One of the findings of our generational wealth initiative was that a sense of belonging is essential to this working. One of the things that we know is required in order to build resilience, we saw this in the pandemic, is mutual aid, right? And a sense of connection with your local economy or with your local community. And so when we think about the economy as not just being the financial tools, but like the shared assets and the community working together to support one another, that's also what we're trying to build. Curtis and I worked on developing an engagement plan for the next 2 years in Brighton. And a big tenet of that is how do we help people sort of participate in this vision and feel an ownership over this vision? Not just our community-based organizations, but our neighbors, right? Are there ways that we can really build a sense of rootedness, a sense of community through shared storytelling and experiences, through events that produce joy, to really have this build resilience in other ways too, social resilience as well as economic.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And thanks for everybody who asked questions. We're going to have just about 10 to 15 minutes now in breakout rooms. This is a chance for y'all to start chatting with each other. A lot of you are plugged into these projects, so maybe have a chance to share what is your piece in this work right now. I'm going to go ahead and put the questions that we have in the chat, but if there's something else that's calling you, feel free to go off script. I'm going to go ahead and open breakout rooms and folks will get assigned automatically. There we go. Awesome. Thank you. So just a few ways to keep being involved if what you heard today piqued your interest. We will be having another lunch lab in August. The best way to find out about that and sign up is by signing up for the People's Economy Lab newsletter, which you can do on this page. I will put the link in the chat.
I gotcha.
Oh, thank you, Mary. And then we also have some contact information there. If you want to get in touch with People's Economy Lab and or Jackie, please feel free to reach out, and we'll also be sending a follow-up email to make sure that you get that information. So if you don't jot it down quickly enough, you will be receiving it later. And then the last ask is to go ahead and visit our website and make a donation if you're excited about this work and you want to support it. That would be incredible. Anything we get helps with us organizing and staffing this work. So, yeah. And then final thing, we've got an event survey if folks want to share how they liked this event today, but also there's an opportunity for you to share what you'd like to see in future lunch labs. If there are topics that you'd like us to cover, we'd love for you to share that with us. And that's it for today. Thank you all so much for being here, and to Jackie for presenting, and I hope you all have a great rest of your weeks.